Hello and welcome to NuORDER's podcast on wholesale digital transformation, the shift from stacks to ecosystems. My name is Tommy Fazio. I am the fashion director here at NuORDER, and I would like to introduce to you today Audrey McLaughlin, founder and CEO of Frank and Eileen, who is joining us on the conversation. Audrey?
Thank you, Tommy. Thank you so much for having me today. This is our 10-year anniversary. 10 years ago, I launched Frank and Eileen and named it after my grandparents, who were married in County Wicklow, Ireland in 1847. Frank and Eileen was born from the idea to use otherworldly Italian fabrics, which had been historically reserved for men, to reinvent button-up shirting for women. No one else had done that. So that's what we built the whole business on over the last 10 years.
Great, thank you, Audrey. Also, we're joined by Joe Cicman, Senior Analyst at Forrester. Hello, Joe.
Hi, Tommy. Hi, everyone. Joe Cicman, and I cover B2B within Forrester's digital transformation team, and I'm delighted to be here today.
Thank you both for joining me on this fun conversation. We're going to start with the first round of questions, and its classification in the state of digital transformation. And our first question out there today is, how has retail adapted to the rise of digitally native direct-to-consumer brands and large e-commerce sites? I'm going to start with Audrey on this question. Audrey?
So, Tommy, Frank and Eileen, when we launched 10 years ago, was a completely different landscape. We launched as a traditional wholesale business model. And over the last 10 years, but most specifically over the last 5 years, we've watched the landscape completely change. So we wanted to make sure that Frank and Eileen was changing with the times instead of getting left behind to figure out in hindsight. So I worked really hard to evolve the business model to become 50% wholesale and 50% D2C so that we could take advantage of the strengths of both sides of the business.
Joe, and your input on this question?
Yeah, so we've seen a few adaptations. If you just look at Dollar Shave Club, for an example, they've had an undeniable influence with their sort of scrappy, niche-specific storytelling, and they've operationalized in a very different way than some of these larger brands. And quite frankly, for a lot of these brands to adapt, they're acquiring.
Great. Audrey, how has this affected your traditional wholesale business?
I think that we took a really unique approach to wholesale from the beginning. So for us, it's had a smaller effect on us than I think some of the more traditional, bigger wholesale brands. But from day one, we had a very exclusive distribution model, which allowed us to really make a big impact with the retailers that we were working with and not spread ourselves too thin. And, I think now everybody's really seeing the shift and the consequences of, if as a traditional wholesale brand, you sold all the big retailers, then now you're really struggling because before, direct to consumer didn't exist and large e-commerce sites didn't exist, there wasn't nearly as many distribution points that everybody's struggling with now. So for us, it's work that we've been able to maintain an incredibly strong specialty store retail base and still maintaining incredible number one brand in our department with our major retailers. And then still at the same time be able to focus on how to pivot our brand as a vertical brand and balance that and make sure that the customer is really enjoying the journey throughout the whole ecosystem. They can buy something from Neiman Marcus and then also come and learn the story from coming onto Frank and Eileen. And we try to make it as cohesive as possible for everybody involved in the system.
Frank and Eileen has a great synergy between the two, traditional wholesale and e-commerce site. Most of the brands that have gone, most of the brands have been affected. They've really upped their game. They really have had to look long and deep about their story, about their DNA, and how they get that message across to the consumer. So the traditional wholesale brands really had to focus on storytelling, where they didn't have to do that. And that storytelling is super important. And, getting that across to the consumer through a wholesale channel or through a digital channel needs to be the same. Joe, your insights here?
So traditional wholesale channels have been radically disrupted by technology. So brands have been forced to rethink their distribution from .coms to traditional retail brands to first and third party marketplaces. But not all brand manufacturers should go the full D2C e-commerce route because it's not a core competency for most brands. It's expensive and it requires a lot of resources.
And do we think that brands that don't go direct D2C are at a disadvantage? Audrey?
I think it's a really interesting question. I actually love what Joe just said, and I think everybody's been in reactive mode for so long, and everybody's trying to catch up. And it's such a valid point that DTC is a very special skill set, and it's so not a core competency of so many traditional wholesale brands. And what they were so good at was traditional wholesale. And maybe there would have. I think it's taking so much resources and so much financial and time resources that they might be better off really focusing on their core competency and doing it better than anybody. And I think one of the reasons that both at wholesale and retail that people are facing so much challenges really just over distribution that people weren't expecting. So now they're distributing at all the major department stores, they're distributing at specialty stores, they're distributing at their own brick and mortar stores, they're distributing at their own DTC e-commerce site and on other third-party e-commerce sites like Shopbop, Net-a-Porter, Amazon. It's just all of a sudden you can get a brand absolutely everywhere, and then maybe it makes people want it nowhere at the same time. It's lost that sense of discovery.
Right, that sense of uniqueness and the sense of discovery.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, our next question. How have brands adopted technologies to support omni-channel selling? Joe, do you want to start this one off?
Yeah, so some brands will just outsource their tech development while others will have very specific proprietary needs that require a lot of essentially customization. But the right mix of tech solutions really depends on the people, objectives, strategies. One of the biggest secrets to success is investing in usability and customer experience. It's integral to customer loyalty and repeat visits. And 61% of US online adults are unlikely to return to a website if it doesn't provide a satisfactory customer experience. So you really can't phone it in.
Audrey, on here, what do you think, what are the secrets to success in adopting a technology for omni-channel selling?
I think the magic to it for brands that did have a story to tell is that all of a sudden gave you an opportunity to be able to talk to your customer directly. In a traditional wholesale model, you talk to your customer through that wholesaler. For the first maybe 5 years, unless I was on an airplane 70% of the time going from retailer to retailer to be able to talk to the end customer and tell them our brand story, and people would get so excited, right? But it's not scalable. You can only be in one store at a time, talking to one customer at a time. So the secret to that using technology is all of a sudden you have this platform to be able to talk directly to your end customer, tell them the magic of your brand, tell them what you're doing, and really engage them in the brand experience. So that's something that a traditional wholesale model never allowed.
Great. Okay, we're going to switch conversations now. Limitations with existing B2B e-commerce technology. Where do we find limitations on the existing B2B e-commerce technology that really affect business? Joe, do you want to start that one off?
Yeah, I think that for what I've observed, just from solving the problem of buying and selling, the B2B e-commerce tech grew up in a way that it was selling websites to sellers. Now that's great from a seller's perspective because they can sell their stuff. But if you're buying, and you're buying from a lot of sellers, you're going to a whole bunch of their different websites. In some cases, e-procurement software has solved that problem, and in some cases, marketplaces have solved that problem. But for something like retail buying, it is absolutely infeasible for a buyer to have a great experience if they're individually going to all of these different brands' wholesale sites. It just doesn't make sense. And no matter how good those brand sites are, the problem is compounded by the number of different experiences. And so you really can't solve the problem with traditional e-commerce approaches. You really need sort of a new player on the field to sort this out, sort of in a marketplace or to intermediate the problem. And that's why I'm so interested in what NuORDER has done to sort of solve this problem, because they didn't take a traditional, build a stack and sell software to a brand. They had to approach it as a two-sided platform, and that's really the only way that you can solve these types of problems.
Audrey, I know you have a portfolio of B2B e-commerce technology. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what that looks like for you?
Okay, and I also want to comment on what Joe just said, and I think to make an analogy, in the traditional wholesale world, we had trade shows, right? So individual stores could not go and see every single brand that they want to buy. There's just simply not enough time. So the idea of trade shows were invented, and all of a sudden you'd go to one trade show and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of brands were all under the same roof. And this allowed buyers to spend 2 days buying hundreds of brands. So I think what NuORDER's been able to do is look at the traditional wholesale model and traditional trade shows and turn it into a modern solution with a technology solution. So they basically are like a digital form of a trade show where they can host all of these brands under one roof, and all of the buyers know exactly how to use it. They go to one place instead of having to go to 100 different B2B sites. And this creates a really,
thank you.
What's that?
Well said, Audrey. Well said. So what does your portfolio look like currently?
So we have 2 B2B solutions. So we attend 2 trade shows. We use NuORDER, and we also use Jor. And those are the 2, to us, those are the 2, technology trade shows that cover the whole contemporary business. So this way we're able to meet the needs of all of our 400 to 500 customers with only 2 B2B platforms.
And our retail platform that you're currently using with the Nordstrom account, how is that working for you?
It's fantastic. We're really excited about it. It's new to us because, as I mentioned, we've always been very, very exclusive with our distribution. So for the first 5 years, we only sold specialty stores. So we really, and back then a B2B solution didn't exist. On our 5-year anniversary, we partnered exclusively with Neiman Marcus, and they required us to use Jor. So we started using Jor for our partnership with Neiman's. And then for our 10-year anniversary this year, we partnered with Nordstrom, and Nordstrom uses NuORDER. So we've been excited to onboard with NuORDER this year for our partnership with Nordstrom and continue to learn more about the technology that it provides.
On the Forrester side, Joe, can you help me understand what the biggest obstacles that keeps a brand from adopting new technology?
Yeah, there's a whole spectrum of them, but if we had to boil it down to one, I would say that they would all roll up under the heading of change management. So there's just so many technology options available out there, and some of them solve sort of the big end-to-end problems, and some of them solve the small tactical problems. But it's just very overwhelming to do the tech selection, and then once you've done that, actually driving adoption. So and that's a people problem. You're not really going to be able to solve that with technology. So there's a craft and a leadership skill to really doing change management very well within companies in order for them, frankly, to benefit from the technology spend.
Thank you so much. Audrey, what have you heard from your end users in your organization about obstacles that they have in adopting the technology or using the technology?
That's a great question. While Joe was answering, I was thinking of it from the buyer point of view versus Joe is speaking about it from the brand point of view. I think one of the challenges for brands in deciding what technology to adopt is the resistance from their buyers. So, buyers have been buying for decades, and it was always in a very analog way. They love to touch and feel product. They love to touch and feel line sheets, and they just want to write on a traditional PO. And they get very quickly overwhelmed by the different options. You know, these are all individual buyers. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. And so for them to be like, you know, I don't know. I mean, one person wants me to use NuORDER, but someone else wants me to use something else. And I get really overwhelmed. Can I just use line sheets? So, you know, I think one of the challenges is to actually get to the buyers and allow them to realize that we're providing this trade show kind of environment where they can only have to use one technology and be able to save themselves unbelievable amounts of time by buying all these different brands under one umbrella and creating this, you know, technology marketplace for them. And then all of a sudden, like, oh, you're solving, you know, you're creating a solution for me, not adding to what I have to learn.
Great. You know, it's funny here at NuORDER, we have a program called Easy Order where a retailer can actually place an order through an email. So they don't have to log into the system. So a brand could set up a preset order for a retailer, just send them an email, and the retailer has to log on to the email and can place the order. For me, ease, speed, and accuracy is the number one thing. You know, I have spent many years in the retail world, and God knows that 10 years ago, I wish we had this technology because it would have made my life much easier. But the idea of easy orders for us, it solves that problem of ease and speed and accuracy, but it also helps the brand and the retailer really get business done quickly. So we're really excited about that new technology. So our last group of questions, the future of wholesale is collaborative. And that is a really important statement. I'm going to go to Audrey on this one. What are B2B e-commerce ecosystems and why should brands care?
I think, you know, as I mentioned before, I think the entire world has changed over the last 5 years. And so you really need to care about what the new system looks like and what does everybody need. So, you know, both with Frank and Eileen and the new brand that we launched this year, Grayson, I really always take a, you know, look at from 10,000 feet and say, all right, what does this new world look like? And how can we create a win-win-win solution? So there's 3 people involved in this equation. There's the brand, the retailers, and then the end customer. And so I think that we've come to a time where the business, it's so complicated that the simplest way to win at it is to really look at all 3 players. You can't just look at yourself anymore and let the retailers fend them for themselves. And, you know, we also are not coming from a time where it's not a closed system anymore where designers can just design and give product and the customer just comes and buys it. The customer now has a voice in what she wants and how she wants it. So I think we have to look at building a very healthy collaborative ecosystem where all 3 people win. You know, what can the brand do to help the retailers win? What can the brand do to help the end customer win and get what she wants? And then ultimately, how do we set it up so that the brand wins, you know, with everybody involved. So that's how we carefully really look at how to structure things from every point of view with this 3-part ecosystem.
And Joe, what is your take on that question?
Yeah, so one of the characteristics of ecosystems is that they can reorganize on their own to optimize for whatever. And so in B2B value chains, if we were outside of the ecosystem view, these would be very rigidly defined contracts, agreements between sequential participants. In an ecosystem, new players can come on the scenes, and you can change your supply chain to accommodate for that. And in the case of technology, there can be a player entirely from the outside who comes in and brings some new piece of technology. And the reason brands should care about that is they're going to have new opportunities in front of them almost every 6 months. And so as an example, Pinterest suddenly allows brands to list direct to consumer, Pinterest has solved the problem of visual search, which is really important in fashion because you can't exactly Google for what you want, and you can get down into a purchase experience. So it was the ecosystem approach, or it was the ecosystem that essentially allowed or enabled Pinterest to come into existence and solve that particular problem of connecting buyers to the fashion that they love. So that's why brands should care about the ecosystem. It gives them opportunities.
And how should a brand, Joe, how should a brand be thinking about the modern retail buyer?
So the modern retail buyer is fickle, empowered, and their, let's say, their loyalty is not necessarily guaranteed. I think also it is incredibly important for brands not only to sort of look at sort of the general characteristics of like what is today's retail buyer, but to have essentially like voice of the customer or real deep customer intimacy to understand what are the needs and behaviors of their particular niche, because sort of there is no general fashion provider, right? There's not like general merchandise. These are niche communities with their own sort of fashion sense, and if you understand that and you listen, you're going to be able to serve their needs, frankly.
You know, today I find buyers are less likely to take a risk based on sell-through history. But, you know, our ultimate consumer is looking for an experience, and they're also looking for unique products. So, Audrey, how should a brand be thinking about that modern retail buyer with those challenges?
That's a great question. And I believe Joe was speaking about the ultimate end consumer. So if we speak to, the actual wholesale buyer, their job and role has changed so much. And I think they're really trying to adjust to it. So on one hand, I think you're right. They're much more conservative than ever and very concerned about taking a risk. There's so many more distribution points for the same brands that they're buying than ever before. So they have a new set of challenges. On the other hand, I think some buyers, some modern buyers are actually taking the opposite approach where they're looking for very unique opportunities. And if they can find them and they know that it will set them apart, they will take actually a very big risk because they all need to differentiate themselves right now, So if you are a Nordstrom or something, they've been very good at it where they really need to be able to have unique product that will set them apart from Neiman's and Saks and Bloomingdale's and all the online retailers as well. So what experience can you get by coming to Nordstrom that you can't get from anyone else? So I think they will really lean in and take a big risk on opportunities like that. But if they're looking at maybe the rest of their portfolio, and if they're looking at brands where they have so many distribution points, then they are going to be more conservative than ever, or asking for unique product, like more demand for exclusives, more demand for people really looking at their distribution and pulling back and limiting the people that they're selling so that each retailer becomes more special.
So, Audrey, how does collaboration play in the future of wholesale?
I believe that the people that really think about what all three of the players need to win, like I mentioned before, so it's like the brand, the retailer, and the end consumer. If you're really thinking about what they need and coming up with ways to collaborate on that, I think those intentional partnerships and intentional collaborations are what's going to be able to set people apart. Maybe launching a brand or a collection with only one retailer, and then that retailer will really help promote it and get the customer engagement because they're not competing against every other retailer. Or maybe special collaborations where a brand does a collaboration with another person of influence, but maybe you only launch it with one retailer so that you can really have a specific point of view and create a really special experience for the end customer. I think those are the kind of intentional decisions that are gonna really help brands stand out.
Joe, and your take on that question?
Yeah, so when you look at digital transformation, it starts with digitization of a process, which is just doing the same thing that you did analog, but with digital. And then it moves on to digitalization, which is the whole sort of workflow can change because it's digital. And then from there, you sort of are able to do digital transformation. With what has happened with digitization and digitalization so far around collaboration and wholesale, it's never going to go back. It's going to only accelerate. And so I'm anticipating that for the future, collaboration will be a greater and greater and greater part of the whole process. Um, I guess once you get a taste of once a retail buyer gets a taste of what it's like to go into a digital trade show, you really can't go back from that.
Thank you so much. This has been truly, truly enlightening. And us at NuORDER love to hear from marketing geniuses like yourself, Joe, and amazing brands like yours, Audrey. And I would love to thank Audrey McLaughlin, founder and CEO of Frank and Eileen, and Joe Cicman, Senior Analyst at Forrester, for their amazing insight today into the wholesale digital transformation arena. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Tommy.
Thanks, Tommy.